Well, thank you. Thanks again for having the opportunity to be here. I guess this is year 16 for me, in fact. So,
Can I sit here with you?
sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
George, have a seat. Anyhow, before I go into this, I just want to mention one thing about this new Institute for Sustainable Food Systems. The website will be live in November. And the reason I want to mention it is because we'll be looking at food systems, global food systems, from production at the primary source all the way through to the consumer. But what's interesting, and what might be interesting for the people in this room, is the fact that when the University of Florida hired me, they knew that I am a fisheries aquaculture person. And they also realized that the oceans and aquaculture is part of the future. So in contrast to a lot of things and a lot of institutes that study food security and food policy, we will be emphasizing the importance of aquaculture and the importance of the sea and aquatic systems for delivering the next generation of food systems. And we'll also be very active in training that next generation of leaders that understand sustainable food systems and how seafood fits in. So anybody who wants to talk to me about that later, that'd be great. So today, we'll be talking about the shrimp production survey. Now, this survey comes from the people in this audience and some that aren't here, but about 71, 72 people who are leaders in the aquaculture industry, shrimp industry in particular, have responded to this survey. And this is, I would argue, the best information available on the state of the global shrimp industry. So let me take a step back. Well, it's not really a step back. This is last year, more or less. As you can see, historically, the shrimp industry had a growth rate of about 6%, 5 to 6% from 2006 to 2011, and then a decline of about 14 or so percent from 2011 to 2013, primarily a result of EMS. That resulted in an increase, a significant increase in price in particular of about 17%, or contributed to an increase in price of 17%. And that's the average wholesale price. Now, the reason I mention that is because that's consistent with economic principles. When supply goes down, price is expected to go up. Now, here's where I have a little bit of a problem. The FAO numbers, and we always provide the FAO numbers for the bulk of the historic reference, suggests that shrimp production in 2012 and 2013 actually increased. Now, this is a concern to me because, in fact, FAO does a great job collecting tons of data on all kinds of species from all over the world, but they don't always have the best information, nor do the countries that provide the information have the best information. So I was in a dilemma. Do I start by updating my data with the FAO data, or would I say, no, I think the industry had a better handle on what was happening with EMS than FAO necessarily does right now? And so I made a command decision that we're going to go with the data from the last 2 years and not the latest FAO data. And the reason simply is because an increase of supply of 6% with a really astronomical increase in price are inconsistent. And I tend to have the belief that the results from the industry that we received last year are probably more correct. And I'll say one more thing, is that FAO has actually revised its statistics in many cases. And since I've been doing this with shrimp data, there's been at least 3 cases where FAO went back and said, oh, there's a mistake here, and they made significant corrections. Whether that will happen in this case, I don't know, but let's move forward. So I'm going back to the data that you provided from last year for 12 and 13. And now we're looking forward to the first 2 years of 14 and 15. Now, these years, 14 and 15, of course, already have occurred. 15 hasn't completely occurred, but still, we have no new global numbers. So the global numbers from the survey suggest that between 2013 to 2015, there's been a significant recovery on the order of 18%. Back to about 2011 levels. And that also corresponds with a price decline, depending on which prices you look at and when you lose your start start and end date of about 9%. And of course, it's been actually a lot more depending on where you look at it. So this is consistent with principles. And then when we push it out to 2017, the expectation, and this is the important slide, is that between, from 2014 to 2017, we're expecting a growth rate of over 7%. And that growth rate, that expectation is coming from you. Now that, of course, could be optimistic, depending on how the control of EMS continues and the control of EHP, and also the implications and impacts of things like the El Nino, which is, of course, the strongest on record, which may influence those numbers as well, and many other factors for that matter. So I'll give you a quick breakdown by region. We can see this is Southeast Asia. There's a considerable impact in 2013 with the primarily EMS. You see an impact also in China, but some recovery. Good recovery, good production pretty much in India, but more or less a flattening out in 2015, 16, 17. And the Americas, we see a steady forward progression, and not much production out of the Mideast or North Africa. There's just a couple highlights. The main highlight is that we can see Southeast Asia and China over the period 2010 to 2013, we have a decline, but then resumption of growth forward to 2013. And we also see this significant growth in India and steady growth in the Americas. Now, this is a breakdown a little more by specific countries. Obviously, I just mentioned China a minute ago, but then you can see the impact in Thailand, some uncertain impact in Vietnam, forecasted and expected good production coming out of Indonesia, and like I say, a flattening in China where we have this new disease. And you also here can see the devastating impact of VMS in the Malaysian numbers. But I'll just skim over these because I have a very short time, and I leave it to you to go back and look at the details. And you see the Thailand impact over 2010 to 2013 there, and the India growth again. And then the Malaysia impact, which is similar to the Thailand effect. Then we move into Latin America. You can see that Ecuador has steadily grown and is expected to continue to grow for the next several years. Mexico was severely impacted by a disease, the AMS, and is now expected to recover, not fully. Brazil is okay. And then we get into a bunch of, there are a lot of minor countries in South America, but most of which are progressing reasonably well. I'll let you look at these details at your leisure. And then there's a few other countries that reported, in particular Saudi Arabia, Madagascar, and Australia. And you can take a look at this as well. The key thing is that Saudi Arabia is shifting more to Vanamai, and the other two places focusing still on Monodon. Now, when you put this all together and break it down by species, you can see that Vanamai accounts for about 75, is expected to account for over 70% of production, and about 75% of production by 17. When we look at in Asia, it's about a little less, only 70%, 60 to 69 to 70% of production in Asia is Vanamai. Now, we combine that with the wild-caught landings. This is the from FAO now, the wild landings, the world landings of wild-caught shrimps. And they've been actually gradually increasing. When we add that to our production, our estimates of production of global aquaculture, aquaculture has been over 50% of global production since the mid-2000s. And even with EMS, it's still more than 50% of global production in 2013. So this is a combination of aquaculture and capture fisheries, and we can see that Vanamai represents at least about 40% of global production and is the dominant species produced. Now, one of the things we asked about in our survey was how would this how would the size composition change looking forward? And so we see that globally, the proportion of smaller shrimp is definitely significant, and much less so in places like the Americas, where they have a higher proportion of larger shrimp. But let me show the details here a little bit. This is an important slide, I think. These are the size categories from Asia. You can see if we go back to 2008, 2009, on the order of 70% of the shrimp were from the mid-size to relatively larger size categories, and only about a little more than 20% in the small shrimp category. Now, expectations for 2015 are that the shrimp size categories, more than 50% will be in the very small shrimp. This is indications of obviously that disease such as EMS and this new disease are causing, what's that? EHP, yeah, exactly, are causing harvests to be at earlier sizes. In contrast, when we look at the Americas, the actual classification of the smaller sizes is slightly declining, in fact, and only about 25% of the Americas is coming in the small size category. That suggests there's not as big of a disease problem there, and also different, perhaps, market strategies, different market targets. So the summary of that is seen here. And basically, you see the green at the bottom there. All the small size categories we're expecting increase globally and in Asia, and somewhat stable in the Americas. And in Asia in particular, you're seeing decrease in the size in the large size categories reported. Now, the other question we ask is about value-added products and, well, the product form. And here again, in summary, you see that in Asia, we have a higher proportion of breaded and other kinds of value-added products. In Americas, it's mostly green or just simply peeled. And the United States, you can see, imports a lot of green and peeled shrimps. Now, here again, here's a bit of a trend here. This is from Asia. You can see that the proportion of processed shrimp seems to be increasing in recent years. I mean, it was decreasing a little bit, and now it's increasing, and only about 39% is going to come in the green head-off or green head-on form. I'm not sure exactly what that says in terms of implications or relationship to things like disease, but it clearly indicates that there's a lot of value-added activities going there. In contrast, this is specifically China, and we see that compared to last year, or the last couple years, it looks like an increase in value-added products. In the Americas, we see very little value-added products, and there's no clear indication that that's going to change in the near term. So, when we look at the summary chart, we see increases in peeled and cooked and breaded products coming out of Asia, whereas more or less you see in the Americas pretty much stable, but an increase in head-on. All right. One of the other things we ask, which actually harkens back to what Wally was saying earlier, is that what are the issues and challenges facing the aquaculture industry? And the number one issue actually is disease, which you'd expect. In fact, but if we go back to 2007, it actually wasn't in the top three. Disease was not in the top three. Those 3 stars indicates what was top 3 in 2007. And that was international market prices, production costs and feed costs, and international trade barriers. We can see that disease has now trumped those things. However, market prices and feed costs are critically important. What's interesting, the contrast is last year versus this year. We can see that diseases have actually dropped down a little bit in terms of importance, and international market prices have increased in terms of their importance as a constraint or an issue challenge facing the industry. And environmental management is dropped a little bit, as well as access to disease-free broodstock, which sort of surprised me. Now, when we look at Asia versus the Americas, we can see that Asia, the top three, are just the same as the top three in total. That is disease, market prices, production costs, in particular feed costs, and seed stock quality and availability. And we see, and then we move to Latin America, its disease is right up there as well, and basically you have the same top three categories. But where it's a little bit interesting is when we look at Asia versus Latin America. We can see that it appears that disease is of greater concern in Asia, as well as international prices relative to Latin America and the Americas. The concern about production costs, in particular feed, is apparently less in the Americas versus Asia, and the availability of seed stock is a less of a concern in the Americas versus Asia. So I know there's a pretty big difference there. And the Americas, in particular, also environmental management has considered much less of a constraint than it is in Asia. So we also asked three other questions about global economic conditions. We asked people whether they think the global economic conditions will be better in 16 versus 15. And in fact, there's a lot of ambivalence. Some agree, some disagree. But this is actually much less bullish than it was last year. But certainly a bit of a mixed bag here. We also asked whether feed prices will be lower in 2016 versus 15. This is very strong that no one expects feed prices to go down in price. Or so either to be the same or higher. And this is even stronger than it was last year, this opinion. And the last one is, will the shrimp market strengthen in 16 versus 15? And here again, most people agree that that's going to be the case. But it's not as bullish as it actually was last year as well. So let me just go through a few more slides that look at some trade trends that I would say, cross support what I was saying about that the evidence that you provided in other years is consistent with reality. One, here's the U.S. shrimp imports. Basically from 2013 to 15, up about 16%, after declining about 16%, which is very consistent with your estimated production figures from other years. And you can see how India, in particular, the red bar at the bottom, and Indonesia have increased their share into the U.S. market considerably, where Thailand and Vietnam, well, Vietnam has dropped off that much, but Thailand in particular has. You can see these are the wild-caught landings and shrimp in the United States, which have also been down a bit, so that helps buoy prices. And just to put this in, this sort of circles back. You can see in 2013, the run-up of prices of import, this is real import prices, and then the decline in 14 and 15, which is very consistent with not only the trade data, but your estimated global production data. And we can also see that in a more detailed picture of white versus monodon here, with the run-up in 13 into 14, and then a decline, steep decline in 14 and 15. It's very consistent with estimated production. And we see this estimated production, this also in our Spanish shrimp imports data, which from 11 to 13 declined about 16%, and now it's recovered about 10%. In the French imports, they were down about 9%, and now they're up on a 5%, not as dramatic. And in the Japanese imports, I don't see a recovery there, but we see the Japanese market is down about 22% from 2011 to 14. So we see that the industry's perspective on what happened is reflected in our data in many different ways. And so that's good. And so in conclusion, let me just run to conclusions here. We see a significant recovery in 2013 to 2014, up about 20% in that year. However, 2014-15, the expected harvest is about the same as 2014, with actually Asia seeing a bit of a decline versus 2014, and the Americas seeing a bit of an increase. But overall, we expect the global growth rate from 15 to 17 to increase about 7% a year for the next couple years. The biggest constraint is clearly disease, followed by market prices. And the summary of expectations for 2016 are higher feed prices, or no decline in feed prices at least, somewhat stronger shrimp market, but less confident than you were in 2014, and mixed about the global economic conditions. Expectations in 14 were actually more bullish than they are this time. So that sort of does a whirlwind of all the kinds of evidence I've collected with Daryl and with Diego about the state of the industry, and I thank you. Thanks.